Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Stellar HFY. First off, thank you. The response to our recent underdog victory stories has been absolutely incredible, and I can see these David versus Goliath scenarios are exactly what you love most. Today, we're diving into perhaps the most impossible military situation humanity has ever faced. 12 soldiers, one tiny outpost, and 100,000 alien warriors who thought they understood what it meant to fight humans. They were about to learn why you should never corner a species that doesn't know when to quit. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get started. Sir, you need to see this right now. Sergeant Jake Morrison's voice cut through the morning quiet of Outpost Delta Seven's command center, his usual calm replaced by something Commander Marcus Thorne had never heard before. Fear. Thorne set down his coffee and moved to the tactical display, where Morrison stood frozen beside the long-range sensor array. The screen showed a sight that made Thorne's blood turn to ice. Hundreds of red dots were emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, each one representing a ship larger than anything in the human fleet. As the sensors refined their readings, the numbers kept climbing. 500 ships, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. Jesus Christ, whispered communications specialist Derek Chen, his face pale in the blue glow of his monitors. That's not a raid fleet, that's an entire armada. Thorne's mind raced as he processed what he was seeing. In his 15 years of military service, he had never encountered anything like this. The largest Zelkan force ever recorded was maybe 300 ships. This was something else entirely. This was total war. Get me a full tactical analysis, Thorne ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting in his chest. I want to know exactly what we're facing. Lieutenant Pavel Kozlov, the outpost intelligence officer, was already pulling up files on his workstation. His fingers flew across the holographic interface as he cross-referenced the sensor data with known Zelkan fleet compositions. What he found made his hands shake. Commander, based on ship classifications and formation patterns, I'm reading approximately 100,000 Zelkan warriors, Kozlov reported, his Russian accent thickening with stress. This is Fleet Admiral Vextar's personal expeditionary force, the same fleet that wiped out 6 human colonies in the past year. The command center fell silent except for the steady hum of life support systems and the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. 12 men suddenly felt very alone in the vast emptiness of space. Thorne looked around at his team. Good soldiers, every one of them, but they were communications specialists and sensor technicians, not frontline infantry. Morrison had combat experience from the border wars, and Kozlov had served in intelligence, but the rest were essentially technicians with basic military training. Their defensive capabilities consisted of automated turrets designed to ward off pirates and energy shields meant to deflect asteroid impacts. Sir, incoming transmission from the lead vessel, Chen announced, his voice barely above a whisper. Put it through, Thorne replied, straightening his uniform. He had no idea what he was going to say to a fleet admiral commanding 100,000 warriors, but he knew these next few minutes would determine whether 50,000 civilians lived or died. The main display shimmered and resolved into the image of Admiral Vextar. The Zelkan commander was exactly what Thorne had expected. 7 feet tall, covered in the distinctive blue-gray scales of his species, with predatory yellow eyes that seemed to look straight through him. Vextar wore the ceremonial armor of a fleet admiral, its surface etched with the symbols of his conquered worlds. Human commander, Vextar's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, translated through the universal communication protocols. I am Fleet Admiral Vextar of the Zelkan hegemony. You will surrender your installation immediately and prepare for occupation. You have 1 standard hour to comply. Thorne felt the eyes of his entire team on him. Behind Vextar's image, he could see the bridge of the massive Zelkan flagship, filled with warriors preparing for what they clearly expected to be a routine conquest. The Admiral's tone suggested he had delivered this same ultimatum hundreds of times before. Admiral Vextar, Thorne replied, fighting to keep his voice level, I am Commander Marcus Thorne of the Human Colonial Defense Force. This outpost serves as the primary communications relay for 3 civilian mining colonies in this system. Those colonies contain 50,000 non-combatant personnel, including families and children. They require time to evacuate. Vextar's expression didn't change. Your civilians are irrelevant. Surrender now, or we will take the outpost by force and eliminate all human presence in this system. Standard Zelkan protocol allows no exceptions. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Thorne stared at the blank screen, his mind working furiously. He had studied the reports from other Zelkan conquests. Their tactics were always the same: establish orbital supremacy, eliminate all military opposition, then systematically harvest whatever resources they wanted. The process typically took 48 to 72 hours from start to finish. Morrison, what's the status on colony evacuations? Thorne asked. New Prosperity started emergency protocols when our sensors first detected the fleet, Morrison reported, checking his communications board. They need at least 60 hours to get everyone to the evacuation ships. Haven's Rest and Kepler Mining Station haven't even begun. They're deeper in the system and didn't get our warning until 10 minutes ago. Thorne closed his eyes and did the math. Even if everything went perfectly, they needed 3 full days to get 50,000 civilians to safety. Against a fleet of 2,000 ships and 100,000 warriors, Outpost Delta 7 couldn't hold out for 3 minutes, let alone 3 days. Sir, Kozlov said quietly, there might be another option. It's desperate, and the odds are terrible, but there's a protocol in the military archives, something called Protocol 7. Thorne looked at his intelligence officer. Kozlov was brilliant, the kind of man who spent his off-duty hours studying alien cultures and reading xenopsychology journals for fun. If anyone had a solution, it would be him. Tell me about Protocol 7, Thorne said. It's a last resort stratagem for impossible defensive scenarios, Kozlov explained. Instead of conventional military resistance, you use cultural psychology and strategic deception to buy time. But it requires intimate knowledge of enemy culture and psychology. The risk is enormous. If it fails, you die anyway. But you also give the enemy valuable intelligence about human tactics. Thorne looked around the command center one more time. 12 good men, sophisticated monitoring equipment, and a few defensive systems that couldn't stop a determined pirate raid, let alone a full invasion fleet. The smart move was to surrender and hope the Zelkans showed mercy to the civilians. But Thorne had read the reports from the conquered colonies. The Zelkans didn't believe in mercy. Kozlov, how much do you know about Zelkan culture? Thorne asked. I've been studying them for 18 months, sir. Their social structures, military traditions, honor codes. It's been my primary research focus since we were stationed here. Thorne felt something stirring in his chest. Not hope exactly, but the absence of complete despair. Then let's see if we can buy our people the time they need. Activate Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was developed by the Strategic Studies Institute after the first contact disasters. Kozlov explained as he pulled up classified files on his workstation. The theory is that, when facing overwhelming force, you don't fight the enemy's strength. You exploit their cultural blind spots. Make them fight according to their rules instead of yours. Thorne studied the documents scrolling across Kozlov's screen. The protocol was based on extensive psychological profiles of various alien species, designed to identify cultural pressure points that could be exploited in desperate situations. For the Zelkans, the key was something called Keth Moran, a ritualized combat tradition that predated their spacefaring civilization. Keth Moran translates roughly to the proving of worth. Kozlov continued, his excitement growing as he accessed deeper files. It's an ancient tradition where commanders must demonstrate their tactical superiority before claiming victory over a worthy opponent. The critical point is that it's considered a grave dishonor to attack an enemy who has formally invoked Keth Moran without first accepting the challenge. Morrison looked up from his sensor readings. You're talking about challenging a fleet admiral with 100,000 warriors to single combat? That's insane. Not single combat, Thorne said, understanding beginning to dawn. Tactical combat. We challenge their entire fleet to prove they're worthy of conquering what they'll call the legendary human fortress of Delta 7. We make it about their honor instead of our survival. Kozlov nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. But here's the beautiful part. Keth Moran traditionally involves a series of escalating challenges over several days. Each side demonstrates their tactical capabilities through increasingly complex maneuvers. We could potentially stretch it out for a week. And while they're busy proving how superior they are, Thorne added, we use our monitoring equipment to map their entire command structure, learn everything we can about how their fleet operates. The plan was audacious beyond belief, but as Thorne looked around the command center, he realized it was also their only chance. Conventional defense was suicide. Surrender meant the death of 50,000 civilians. But if they could somehow turn this into a contest of tactical demonstration rather than outright warfare, they might buy enough time for the evacuations to complete. Chen, open a channel to Admiral Vextar, Thorne ordered. Full ceremonial protocols. Make it look as official as possible. As the communication link established, Thorne straightened his uniform and tried to project confidence he didn't feel. The main display showed Vextar on his flagship bridge, clearly annoyed at being contacted again so soon. Admiral Vextar, Thorne began, his voice carrying formal authority. As commander of this strategic installation, I invoke the ancient right of Kethmaran. Your fleet has come to claim what you believe is a simple outpost, but you face the primary defensive fortress of humanity's most contested system. Honor demands that you prove your worthiness to claim such a prize. The effect on Vextar was immediate and electric. The Zelkan admiral's yellow eyes widened, and Thorne could see other warriors on the bridge turning to stare at their commander. Whatever reaction Vextar had expected, it wasn't this. You dare invoke Kethmaran? Vextar's voice carried a mixture of surprise and what might have been respect. You understand what this means, human commander? I understand perfectly, Thorne replied. 7 days of escalating tactical demonstrations. Each side proves their strategic superiority through increasingly complex challenges. The winner claims not just victory, but the honor of having defeated a worthy opponent. Vextar was silent for long moments, clearly weighing his options. Behind him, Thorne could see other Zelkan officers engaged in intense discussion. Finally, the admiral spoke, again. Very well, Commander Thorne. You have invoked Kethmaran against the Zelkan hegemony's greatest fleet. 7 days of tactical demonstration, beginning at the next cycle. But understand this. When we prove our superiority, your fortress will fall, and every human in this system will face the consequences of your arrogance. Accepted, Thorne replied. May the most worthy commander prevail. The transmission ended, and the command center erupted in a mixture of relief and terror. They had bought time, but now they had to figure out how to survive 7 days of tactical demonstrations against the most powerful fleet in Zelkan space. Morrison, get me a complete status report on our defensive systems, Thorne ordered. I need to know exactly what we can make look impressive for the next week. Kozlov, I want you to design a series of demonstrations that showcase different aspects of our capabilities while giving us maximum intelligence gathering opportunities. Chen, establish secure communications with all 3 colonies and coordinate evacuation schedules. As his team scattered to their tasks, Thorne remained at the tactical display, studying the massive fleet arrayed against them. 2,000 ships, each one capable of reducing his outpost to atomic particles. But for the next 7 days, they wouldn't be weapons. They would be participants in an elaborate dance of honor and tactical demonstration. The real battle wouldn't be fought with energy weapons and missiles. It would be fought with intelligence, deception, and the hope that 12 humans could somehow find a way to outthink 100,000 aliens who had conquered half the galaxy. Thorne allowed himself one moment of doubt, then pushed it aside. 50,000 lives depended on what happened in the next week. Failure wasn't an option. The greatest tactical deception in human history was about to begin. They're using a triple redundant quantum encryption network, Kozlov whispered, his eyes never leaving the scrolling data streams on his monitors. Every single ship in that fleet is constantly talking to every other ship. I've never seen anything like it. It was day 3 of the tactical demonstrations, and the command center had transformed into something resembling organized chaos. Every available surface was covered with cables, jury-rigged monitoring equipment, and displays showing Zelkan fleet communications. The air hummed with electronic interference, and the smell of overheated processors filled the cramped space. Thorne stood behind Kozlov's workstation, watching patterns of light dance across multiple screens. Each pattern represented thousands of encrypted messages flowing between Zelkin vessels, tactical updates, status reports, authentication codes. What should have been incomprehensible alien gibberish was slowly revealing its secrets under Kozlov's relentless analysis. "Look at this," Morrison said from his position at the sensor array. "Every time we execute one of our defensive maneuvers, their entire fleet shifts position within seconds. Not just the ships in our immediate area, all 2,000 of them. They're coordinating movements across a battle space that spans half the solar system." The previous 2 days had been a masterclass in controlled desperation. Thorne had designed each tactical demonstration to showcase different aspects of their defensive capabilities, while maximizing opportunities for intelligence gathering. Yesterday's engagement had featured their automated turret systems in what appeared to be a complex point defense exercise. In reality, it was an excuse to force the Zelkan fleet into specific formations that revealed their command hierarchy. Today's demonstration had been even more elaborate. Thorne had staged what appeared to be a full-scale defensive drill, complete with simulated hull breaches and emergency protocols. The Zelkins had responded with their own tactical display, a precisely choreographed maneuver involving 800 ships that had lasted 6 hours and covered millions of cubic kilometers of space. "Sir, you need to see this," Chen called out from his communication station. His face was pale with exhaustion, but his eyes were bright with discovery. "I've been monitoring their command frequencies during the demonstrations. Watch what happens when Admiral Vextar gives a fleet-wide order." The main display showed a time-lapse visualization of Zelkan communication traffic. When Vextar issued a command, it didn't propagate outward in the expected pattern. Instead, it went to specific command ships, which then verified the order with multiple other vessels before passing it down their individual chains of command. But here was the crucial part. Every verification required a response from the original command ship, creating a web of constant authentication handshakes. "It's like they don't trust their own command structure," Morrison observed. "Every order has to be confirmed and reconfirmed before anyone acts on it." Kozlov nodded, his fingers flying across his interface as he traced the communication patterns. "It's not about trust, it's about security. They're preventing infiltration by requiring constant identity verification. But look at the timing." He highlighted specific data streams on his screen. Every ship in the fleet synchronizes these authentication protocols simultaneously, once every 24 hours. It's like a massive security handshake involving the entire armada. The implications hit Thorne like a physical blow. A security system that's sophisticated didn't just happen. It was a response to a specific threat. Someone had successfully infiltrated Zelkan fleets before, and this was their countermeasure. "Kozlov, how much processing power would it take to maintain that level of encryption across 2,000 ships?" Thorne asked. "Enormous," Kozlov replied without hesitation. "They'd need quantum processors on every vessel, all running in perfect synchronization. Any disruption to the network would cause cascading failures throughout the entire fleet." Sergeant Davies, their electronics specialist, looked up from a tangle of monitoring cables he'd been adjusting. "Sir, if their entire command structure depends on synchronized authentication, what happens if you disrupt the synchronization?" "Theoretically," Kozlov paused, considering the question, "the system would lock up trying to verify conflicting authentication protocols. Every ship would be waiting for confirmation that never comes." The command center fell silent, except for the constant electronic humming of their improvised intelligence gathering operation. 12 men stared at each other, understanding beginning to dawn. They might have just discovered the weakness they needed. From the Zelkan perspective, Admiral Vextar was growing increasingly confident. The human defensive demonstrations had been impressive in their own limited way, but they revealed exactly what he had expected: a small force with sophisticated equipment, but no real understanding of large-scale tactical coordination. Their defensive systems were adequate for their size, but they showed no sign of being able to threaten a fleet of his magnitude. "The humans fight like humans," Vextar told his tactical officers during their daily briefing. "Individual excellence, creative improvisation, but no capacity for the kind of coordinated action that wins wars. 4 more days, and we will have satisfied the requirements of Kethmaran with honor. Back in the Outpost command center, the exhaustion was taking its toll. None of them had slept more than 3 hours at a stretch in the past 4 days. Chen's hands shook from too much caffeine, and Morrison's eyes were bloodshot from staring at sensor displays. But they were making progress. New Prosperity completed evacuation 6 hours ago, Morrison reported, consulting his communications log. Haven's Rest finished 3 hours ago. That's 32,000 civilians safe. Kepler Mining Station is down to 18,000. But they're the farthest out. They need at least another 48 hours. Thorne felt the familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. 2 days remaining in the tactical demonstrations, and 18,000 lives still hanging in the balance. The Zelkan fleet's command structure was sophisticated beyond anything they had previously encountered. But sophistication also meant complexity, and complexity meant potential failure points. Kozlov, I need you to focus on that synchronization protocol, Thorne ordered. If we can find a way to disrupt it during the authentication window, we might have something. Davies, start looking at our communications array. I want to know if there's any way to modify it for signal transmission instead of just reception. As his team dove back into their analysis, Thorne allowed himself a moment to look out the command center's small viewport. The Zelkan fleet hung in space like a constellation of death. 2,000 points of light that represented the most powerful military force he had ever faced. In 48 hours, those lights would become weapons of annihilation. But for now, they were still just participants in an elaborate tactical dance. And somewhere in that dance, 12 humans were looking for the steps that would save 50,000 lives. I've got it. Kozlov's voice was barely a whisper, but in the cramped command center, it cut through the electronic noise like a gunshot. I know how to break them. It was day 5, 14 hours into what was supposed to be their most sophisticated tactical demonstration yet. Thorne had staged an elaborate multi-phase defensive exercise that showcased human adaptive tactics, while Kozlov worked frantically in the background to piece together the final elements of the Zelkan command puzzle. The intelligence officer's workstation looked like the aftermath of an explosion. Coffee cups, data tablets, and printouts covered every available surface. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting jury-rigged processors that hummed with the strain of analyzing 4 days' worth of intercepted Zelkan communications. Kozlov himself looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, his eyes red-rimmed and wild with exhaustion and discovery. "Show me," Thorne said, moving to stand behind Kozlov's chair. "Remember the authentication protocols we identified?" Kozlov pulled up a complex diagram showing the Zelkan fleet's communication network. "I've been analyzing them against captured protocols from previous human encounters with Zelkan forces. Look at this." The screen displayed 2 sets of encryption signatures side by side. One was clearly alien in origin, complex mathematical structures that hurt to look at directly. The other was unmistakably human, elegant, efficient, and familiar. "They reverse-engineered our quantum encryption methods from the colonies they conquered," Kozlov explained, his words coming faster as his excitement built. "They integrated human encryption protocols into their command networks as a security enhancement. They thought it would make their systems impenetrable." Morrison leaned over to get a better look at the display. "But that's impossible. Human and Zelkan encryption systems use completely different mathematical foundations. How could they possibly integrate them?" "That's exactly the point," Kozlov said, turning to face the rest of the team. "They couldn't integrate them properly. They created a hybrid system that tries to authenticate using both protocols simultaneously. During normal operations, it works fine because the authentication requests are sequential. But if you could force the system to process both protocols at exactly the same time, the implications hit Thorne like a physical blow. It would create a feedback loop. Not just a feedback loop, Kozlov corrected, his voice trembling with the magnitude of what he had discovered. An infinite feedback loop. The system would lock up trying to authenticate against incompatible protocols. Every ship in the fleet would be waiting for verification that could never come. Davies looked up from the communications array he had been modifying for the past 2 days. "Sir, I've been working on reconfiguring our monitoring equipment. If we route everything through the fusion reactor and use the entire communications array as a transmitter instead of a receiver, we could generate a massive multi-frequency pulse. How massive? Thorne asked. Powerful enough to reach every ship in the Zelkan fleet simultaneously, Davies replied. But we'd have to shut down all defensive systems while the capacitors charge. 12 minutes of complete vulnerability, and we'd only get one shot. Chen, who had been monitoring Zelkan communication traffic, suddenly straightened in his chair. Sir, I've been tracking their synchronization patterns. The fleet-wide authentication handshake happens every day at the same time. 0800 hours Zelkan standard. That's in 18 hours. The command center fell silent as the full scope of their situation became clear. They had discovered a potentially devastating weakness in the Zelkan fleet's command structure, but exploiting it would require perfect timing, enormous risk, and more luck than any 12 people had a right to expect. What's the status on Kepler Mining Station? Thorne asked. Morrison consulted his evacuation reports. 18,000 civilians remaining. They need at least 36 more hours to get everyone to the evacuation ships. Thorne closed his eyes and did the mathematics of desperation. The tactical demonstrations would end tomorrow. If they didn't act during the synchronization window, Admiral Vextar would declare Keth Moran complete and begin orbital bombardment. 18,000 people would die. Kozlov, what are the odds this actually works? Thorne asked. His intelligence officer was quiet for a long moment, staring at the data streams flowing across his monitors. Honestly, sir, I have no idea. The theory is sound, but we're talking about disrupting the command network of the most sophisticated military force in the galaxy using communications equipment that was designed to monitor deep space radio telescopes. But it could work, Thorne pressed. It could work, Kozlov admitted, if we time it perfectly, if our modifications hold together, if the Zelkan authentication protocols behave exactly the way I think they will, and if Admiral Vextar doesn't realize what we're doing until it's too late. Thorne looked around the command center at his team, 12 good men who had volunteered for what they thought would be a routine assignment, monitoring deep space communications. Instead, they had found themselves planning the most audacious military gambit in human history. Davies, how long do you need to complete the modifications? Thorne asked. 8 hours, if everything goes perfectly, Davies replied. But sir, once we start the reconfiguration, there's no going back. We'll be committed. Morrison, can we maintain the appearance of normal tactical demonstrations while Davies works? I can stage some routine defensive exercises, Morrison said. Nothing too elaborate, but enough to keep the Zelkans from getting suspicious. Thorne felt the weight of 18,000 lives pressing down on him. In 18 hours, they would either achieve the impossible or die trying. There were no other options. Chen, send a coded message to Kepler Mining Station, Thorne ordered. Tell them they have 36 hours to complete evacuation, no matter what. Davies, start your modifications. Kozlov, I need you to run every possible simulation of the authentication disruption. I want to know exactly what we're walking into. As his teams scattered to their final preparations, Thorne remained at the tactical display, watching the Zelkan fleet maintain its perfect formations. 2,000 ships, 100,000 warriors, all of them confident in their overwhelming superiority. In 18 hours, they would discover that sometimes the smallest force could strike the most devastating blow. But first, 12 humans had to survive the most dangerous night of their lives. The countdown to the impossible had begun. Commander, they're moving into bombardment formation. Morrison's voice was steady, but Thorne could see the fear in his eyes. Vextars had enough of the games. It was 0700 hours on day 7, and through the command center's viewport, the Zelkan fleet was repositioning itself with deadly precision. Ships that had maintained demonstration formations for 6 days were now arranging themselves in the textbook pattern for orbital bombardment. Concentric rings of firepower designed to reduce a planetary target to molten slag in minutes. Thorne stood at the tactical display, watching red indicators track the movement of 2,000 enemy vessels. In 60 minutes, the fleet would execute its daily synchronization protocol. In 61 minutes, either the most powerful armada in Zelkan space would be floating helplessly in the void, or Outpost Delta 7 would be a cloud of superheated plasma. Davies, status on the modifications? Thorne asked. The electronics specialist didn't look up from his work. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he made final adjustments to the communications array they had transformed into humanity's most desperate weapon. Capacitor banks are holding steady, fusion reactor is running at 110% of rated capacity, and the frequency generators are calibrated to Kozlov's specifications. But sir, we're pushing this equipment far beyond its design limits. If anything fails during the pulse, it won't fail, Thorne said with more confidence than he felt. Chen, what's the status on Kepler Mining Station? Final evacuation ships launched 20 minutes ago, Chen reported. All civilian personnel are clear of the system, but Commander, Admiral Vextar is broadcasting on all frequencies. He's declaring Kethmaran complete and giving us 15 minutes to surrender before bombardment begins. Kozlov looked up from his analysis station, where he had spent the past 12 hours studying intercepted Zelkin communications. His discovery had been as valuable as it was dangerous. The fleet wasn't just a military force, it was a political battleground. Sir, I've identified the commanders Vextar considers his primary rivals. Ship commanders Zethkal, Morden, and Velthar. Each one commands a significant portion of the fleet, and based on their private communications, each one believes this campaign is designed to eliminate them in glorious but fatal combat. They think Vextar is sending them to die? Thorne asked. They know he is, Kozlov confirmed. Zelkin military politics are brutal. Vextar has positioned his rivals in the most dangerous assault positions. When the bombardment begins, their ships will be the first to engage our defenses, taking the heaviest casualties while Vextar claims the victory. Thorne felt a cold smile spread across his face. Political manipulation was something humans understood very well. Chen, can you establish direct communications with those three commanders without going through the fleet command network? Already done, sir. I've been monitoring their personal communication channels. I can reach them directly. The synchronization window was 37 minutes away. Thorne looked around the command center one final time. His team was ready. 12 men who had transformed from communications specialists into the architects of the most audacious military deception in human history. Gentlemen, in 36 minutes, we're going to discover whether intelligence can triumph over overwhelming force, Thorne announced. Davies, begin final power routing. Kozlov, prepare the disruption sequence. Morrison, monitor fleet positions. Chen, get ready to broadcast on my signal. The next 30 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Outside, the Zelkin fleet completed its bombardment formation, 2,000 ships arranged in perfect killing formations. Inside the command center, 12 humans made final preparations for a plan so desperate it bordered on insanity. At 0759 hours, Admiral Vextar's voice echoed through the outpost speakers. Human Commander, Kethmaran is complete. You have demonstrated your capabilities, and while impressive for your species, they are insufficient. Surrender now or face annihilation. Admiral Vextar, Thorne replied, his voice carrying across the fleet's communication network. Before you begin your bombardment, perhaps your ship commanders should know why you've positioned them to die while you claim the glory. The effect was immediate. On multiple frequency bands, Thorne could hear startled voices as Zelkin commanders realized their communications were being monitored. But he wasn't done. Chen, direct transmission to Commanders Zethkal, Morden, and Velthar, Thorne ordered. Then, speaking directly to the three rival commanders, he continued, Your admiral has studied human defensive capabilities for 6 days. He knows exactly where our strongest weapons are positioned. Fascinating that he's placed your ships directly in those killing zones while keeping his own forces safely in reserve. The response was instantaneous chaos. Private communications channels lit up as the three commanders began demanding explanations from their subordinates and questioning their assault positions. Vextar's voice could be heard screaming orders, but confusion was spreading through the fleet's command structure like wildfire. Synchronization window opening in 15 seconds, Kozlov announced. Davies, initiate power transfer to communications array, Thorne ordered. Throughout the outpost, lights dimmed as massive amounts of energy flowed into their improvised weapon. Defensive systems shut down one by one, leaving them completely vulnerable. 10 seconds to synchronization, Kozlov called out. The Zelkin fleet began its daily authentication protocol, 2,000 ships simultaneously requesting verification of their command authority. It was the moment of perfect vulnerability they had been waiting for. Fire, Thorne commanded. Davies slammed his hand down on the activation control. The communications array discharged 6 days' worth of stored energy in a single, precisely targeted pulse. The outpost's lights died completely as every amp of power flowed into the disruption beam. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the lights on Zelkin's ships began to flicker and die. The quantum disruption pulse had reached the fleet at the exact moment of authentication, forcing their hybrid command systems to process incompatible protocols simultaneously. Across 2,000 ships, computer systems locked into infinite loops, trying to verify commands that could never be verified. Navigation systems failed. Weapon systems shut down. Communication arrays went dark. In less than 5 minutes, the most powerful fleet in Zelkan space had become 2,000 helpless hulks drifting in the void. The silence that followed was broken only by Morrison's amazed whisper, "My God, it actually worked." "Admiral Vextar, this is Commander Thorne." The transmission cut through the chaos of dead Zelkan communication networks, reaching the flagship through emergency frequencies. "I believe we need to discuss terms." Inside the disabled Zelkan flagship, Admiral Vextar stood in the dim glow of emergency lighting, surrounded by the dark screens of his command center. His tactical officers worked frantically at manual controls, trying to restore even basic ship functions. The proud fleet that had conquered 6 human colonies was now floating helplessly in space, their sophisticated command networks reduced to useless metal and circuitry. "What have you done?" Vextar's voice carried the weight of a military career collapsing in real time. Around him, 100,000 warriors were trapped aboard ships with failing life support systems and no way to coordinate any response. "I've demonstrated why you should never underestimate a species that considers problem-solving a form of recreation," Thorne replied. His voice was calm, but inside the Outpost command center, his team was barely containing their amazement at what they had accomplished. "Your ship's life support systems are failing, Admiral. Your warriors have perhaps 6 hours before the situation becomes critical. I'm prepared to offer terms that will save their lives." The next hour was a masterclass in strategic negotiation. Thorne understood that completely humiliating Vextar would only create a vengeful enemy. Instead, he offered the Zelkan Admiral something precious, a way to save face while still achieving complete human victory. "These terms are unacceptable," Vextar initially protested when Thorne outlined his demands. "Complete withdrawal from the Kepler 442 system, cessation of attacks on human civilian targets, prisoner exchange protocols. You ask me to surrender to a force of 12 humans. I'm asking you to make a strategic withdrawal after successfully demonstrating Zelkan tactical superiority," Thorne corrected. "Your forces proved they could coordinate fleet movements across an entire solar system. You showed tactical precision that no human force could match. The demonstration of Kethmorin is complete, and honor has been satisfied." It was a brilliant piece of psychological manipulation. By framing the Zelkan defeat as a successful demonstration rather than a military disaster, Thorne gave Vextar a narrative that preserved his honor while still achieving every human objective. The critical factor was time. Zelkan engineering teams would eventually figure out how to manually reboot their command systems, but that process would take at least 6 hours. During those 6 hours, the final evacuation ships from Kepler Mining Station cleared the system, and human reinforcements arrived to secure the area permanently. When Vextar finally accepted the terms, his voice carried a mixture of defeat and grudging respect. "Commander Thorne, in 40 years of military service, I have never encountered an opponent who fought as you have fought. You used our own strength against us, turned our confidence into blindness, and achieved victory without firing a single shot in anger. That's what humans do, Admiral," Thorne replied. "We adapt." The aftermath of the victory rippled through both human and Zelkan space. Within weeks, the story of Outpost Delta 7 had become legend. 12 humans who defeated 100,000 aliens through intelligence, cultural understanding, and sheer audacity. The tactical principles Thorne had employed were immediately incorporated into human military doctrine, fundamentally changing how humanity approached asymmetric warfare. For the Zelkan hegemony, the defeat forced a complete reevaluation of their military strategies. Admiral Vextar, true to his word, never again attacked human civilian targets. More importantly, his detailed reports on human tactical thinking influenced an entire generation of Zelkan military planners, many of whom developed a grudging respect for human ingenuity. The 12 men of Outpost to Delta 7 each received humanity's highest military decoration, but for them, the real victory was simpler and more profound. 50,000 civilians lived because 12 people refused to accept that overwhelming force always wins. Commander Marcus Thorne continued his military service, eventually rising to become director of the Strategic Studies Institute. Lieutenant Pavel Kozlov became humanity's leading expert on alien cultural psychology. Sergeant Jake Morrison trained the next generation of human tactical officers. Each man carried with him the knowledge that intelligence, determination, and adaptability could overcome any odds. Outpost Delta 7 was rebuilt and expanded, becoming both a strategic monitoring station and a symbol of human potential. A plaque in the command center bore a simple inscription, "Intelligence over force, adaptation over strength." Years later, when young officers asked how 12 humans had defeated 100,000 aliens, the answer was always the same. They didn't defeat the aliens through superior firepower or advanced technology. They won because they understood that in the vast complexity of the universe, the most sophisticated systems often have the most exploitable weaknesses. They won because when faced with impossible odds, humans don't surrender. They adapt, they innovate, and they find a way to turn their enemy's greatest strength into their greatest vulnerability. The victory at Outpost Delta 7 became more than military history. It became proof that no challenge is truly insurmountable for a species determined enough to keep trying, smart enough to keep learning, and stubborn enough to never give up. In the end, that's what made the difference. Not weapons or numbers or technology, but the simple human refusal to accept defeat. That refusal, multiplied by 12 and amplified by desperation, had changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The legend of the human outpost that made 100,000 aliens surrender with just 12 defenders would inspire generations of humans to come, reminding them that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting harder, but from thinking smarter. If this story gave you chills about what 12 determined humans can accomplish against impossible odds, smash that subscribe button right now. Now we want to hear from you. If you were Commander Thorne facing a fleet of 100,000 enemies with just your small team, what would be your desperate last resort strategy? To buy time and save lives? Drop your tactical genius in the comments below. We read every single one and love seeing your creative solutions.